Okay, Boker Tov. So we began yesterday the third parak. Let's maybe do a quick review of what we saw yesterday because it's one continuous sugya. It'll be a little bit hard to continue without some chazara. So we started off. Let's just read through the Mishnah again. Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Bet at the bottom, right? Third parak of Masechet Beitza, parak Ein Sadin. We said that Seidah is one of those malachot, even though it's related to Ochel Nefesh, quite directly related to Ochel Nefesh. Nonetheless, Seidah as a malacha is not going to be permitted on Yom Tov. We saw Rashi and Tosfot exactly why that is. So we say, and Ein Sadin Dagir Min Abivarim B'Yom Tov, right? We cannot trap. Again, it's confusing how the language, because if I say Ein Sadin means I'm not allowed to trap, means it would be trapping, right? The fish from these enclosures on Yom Tov, meaning the fish is not considered trapped. Ve'enonin if name or not, and I cannot place before them food. Aval tzadin chaya ve'of min avivarim, ve'enonin if name or not. However, tzadin chaya ve'of, meaning when it comes to birds and it comes to animals, so we are allowed to trap them. In other words, we're not allowed to trap them. We're not allowed to perform the malacha of trapping. But if you take them from these enclosures, that is not considered trapping because they're already nitzod ve'omed. They're already considered that they are trapped in this enclosure. When you brought them there in the first place, that would have been trapping, which is asur on Yom Tov. Rashbag Omer lo kol habivarim shavin. Rashbag says not every bivar, not every enclosure is considered the same. Ze aklal. He has the principle. Right? Kol ha-mechusal tzeidah asur. Right? Anything which is mechusal tzeda, meaning that it hasn't been trapped, right? I wouldn't be allowed to. And we're going to see the Gemara is going to go into exactly what the definitions, what the parameters are, what is considered mechusal tzeda and what's not. So we saw the Gemara said, "V'raminu bivarin shel chaya v'shel ofot ein sadim mem b'yom tov ve'ein notnin lifneim mezonot kasha chaya chaya kasha ofot ha'ofot." So we say, Mishnah over here. Our Mishnah Aviyah said that once they're in the bivarin, they're considered trapped. However, this Braita says bivarin shachayav v'shalafot ein sadim hem b'yom tov ein nivnei or not. Says that you cannot you cannot trap the animals or the birds from the bivar. In other words, they are not yet considered trapped there. So which is it? Are they trapped or are they not trapped? That is the stira. That's the contradiction. So we said really it's two contradictions. We have kasha chaya chaya ofot ofot. We have a difficulty between our Mishnah and this Braita, both regarding chaya and regarding ofot. Okay, so the first attempt, basically the structure of the Gemara is we're able to solve the contradiction regarding chaya, regarding animals, but then we're still left with a contradiction regarding ofot. So once we have to give a different terutz to solve the contradiction of ofot, then we basically go back and say, well, once we have to change the terutz anyway, so we'll change the original terutz we said about chaya. We want to come up with one resolution that's going to solve both problems. So the Gemaras have Amina now as a way to solve the contradiction in terms of the chaya, but ultimately we're going to reject that afterwards. But let's see. So right, step by step. So we said the first stage is as follows. Bishlama chaya chaya. We're in the fourth line of the Gemara, right? Bishlama chaya chaya lo kasha. Regarding animals, not a contradiction. It's not a difficulty. Why? Because we say Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbanan. One is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. One is the opinion of Rabbanan. So let's see what exactly is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So we have the Mishnah in Shabbos talking about trapping. It tells us as follows: Rabbi Yehuda omer. Right, Rabbi Yehuda says that what? That if you trap a tzipor into a migdal is a sort of this wooden cupboard, right? Utzvi labayit, or a deer into a house, so then you would be chayav. So the implication is only if you got the bird into a migdal, and only if you got the deer into the house, into the bayit. But therefore the diuk is labayit hu demechayev, aval lebivarin lo. Meaning only if you got the deer into the house, but if you trap the deer into the bivar, that would not be considered trapping. It's still considered mechusar tzeda in that bivar, and that would be the opinion of the Braita that the Gemara gave, right? So the Braita, follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but our Mishnah follows the opinion of Chachamim. What did Chachamim say? Says the Gemara, Chachamim omrim, tzipor lamigdal, v'tzvi labayit laginav v'lachatzev v'labivarin. Right. So regarding tzipor, they both agree, both Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim, that the tzipor needs to be in a migdal in order for it to be trapped. If the tzipor is inside your house, and as we mentioned yesterday, right, if it's flying around, it's still mechusar tzedah because you still can't quite get it. So they agree on that. But with the tzvi, whereas Rabbi Yehuda said only if the tzvi is inside your house is it considered trapped, otherwise mechusar tzedah. Chachamim say no. If you have a tzvi inside your house, if you have it in the gina, in the chatzer, or in the bivarin, that's what concerns us. That would not be. That would still be. That would be considered trapped already. So therefore. So we've solved the contradiction about Chaya, right? We said that our Mishnah is the opinion of Chachamim, and our Braita is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. But regarding Ofot, it's still a kasha, because even if we say that one's the opinion of Chachamim, one's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, they both say the same thing, as we see from this Mishnah in Shabbos. So that can't be. So it says the Gemara, our Ofot kasha. Right? We're still left with the contradiction where regarding Ofot. So v'chi so if you'll say hanami lo kasha, ha bebivar mekure, ha bebivar she'eno mekure. Okay, so if you'll say that no, it's not a contradiction, that one is talking about a bivar, an enclosure which has a roof, and one is talking about an enclosure which doesn't have a roof. In other words, our Mishnah, which says. But our Mishnah, which says Sadin Chayav of Mina Bivarin, that's talking about a bivar that has a roof. And the Braita that says no, you can't, it's talking about one that doesn't have a roof, and therefore it's much harder to get the birds out. If you'll say that that's the difference, right? Chiteima Anami Lokasha Habivar Mekule Habivar Sheno Mekule Vabayit. That you can't say, right? Essentially, what we're suggesting is the way to resolve the contradiction is by saying that the Braita that our Gemara quoted, right, that says Bivarin shachav shalfot ein sadim b'yom tov. That must be talking about a bivar that's what? It doesn't have a roof. It doesn't have a roof, and that's why we say you can't have the bird. But the Gemara immediately rejects that. It says no, because if the bivar has a roof, then that's exactly the same as a bayit. That's the same as a house. But we've just said that whether it's Rabbi Yehuda or whether it's Chachamim, both agree when it comes to the bird over here that the bird has to be inside a migdal. The bird can't be in a bayit. In other words, even if it's a bivar that has a roof, which is like a bayit, the bird there is still not considered trapped. So how do we resolve the contradiction? So here the Gemara says, hang on a second. No, you have to understand that the Gemara, right, the Braita, and the Mishnah and Shabbos that the Gemara quotes, essentially we have three sources, right? This is why it gets a bit confusing. We have our Mishnah Masechet Beitzah. We have the Braita, which the Gemara quoted in the first line, and then when it said Titnan, and it brings us the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim, that is the Mishnah in Shabbat. So there's our Mishnah, then there's the Braita that's quoted in the Gemara, and there's the Mishnah that's quoted in the Gemara. Okay, so in the Braita and the Mishnah that's quoted in the Gemara, where from both of them it emerges that a bird that is in a house, or if it was in a roofed enclosure, is still not considered trapped, says the Gemara now, Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Hacha betzipol duro askinan, she'ena mekabelet ma'ut. So he says over here in this Braita and the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbat, we're talking about a special kind of bird. We're talking about a bird which is called a tzipol duro. Now, why is it called a tzipol duro? The word dror means freedom. It's a bird she'ena mekabelet marut. It's not. It's undomesticated, I guess. And this is a bird that's going to be able to escape. Have a look at Rashi. Rashi says here, "B'tzipol dol shedalab babayit kebasadeh." This bird, it's inside the house, it's as if it's in the field. Shodad li shamet bezaviyot habayit. It knows how to escape, how to go into the different corners of the house. They're called tzad. V'lachein nikret drol. Therefore, it's called drol al shem dira. So the other word draw is related to dira, the place where it dwells. Shedela b'chol makom. It dwells wherever it wants, but it's free essentially. The Tana Dvei Rabbi Yishmael says back in the Gemara now. Tana Dvei Rabbi Yishmael lamen kashma tzipor dul shedala kebayit kebesadeh. Okay, so in other words, yeah, we're talking about a tzipor dul, this bird, whether it's wherever it is, it's going to it's still considered free. So now that we've said that, essentially the Braita and the Mishnah are talking about a different reality, meaning that's the resolution. It's not that one is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and one is the opinion of Chachamim, because at least when it relates to a fort, Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim hold the exact same thing. But we've said it, so therefore, in order to relate, to resolve the contradiction when it comes to a fort, we're talking about a different type of bird, or we're talking about a different type of reality. So if that's the case, that our Mishnah and the Braita are talking about different things, so I'd rather say they're talking about different things than say that one follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and one follows the opinion of Chachamim. That's what we said previously regarding Chayah, but now we don't need to say that. So says the Gemara, now that you've said that, so now we can say now that we've explained the difference. So chaya nami lo kasha. Now we can say that regarding animals, it's not a contradiction either. And how do we solve it? Ha bevival katan, ha bevival gadol. That's the difference. That one Mishnah, one says you're not allowed to trap the animal from a bivar, from an enclosure. One says you are allowed to. The one says that you're not allowed to. It's talking about a bivar gadol, talking about a large enclosure where the animal is still not yet trapped. The one that says you are allowed to is talking about a small enclosure. Okay, so there's no contradiction at all, and there aren't different opinions. Look at Rashi. Rashi over here says, Hashtadatit lachi. Now that you've come to this, right, I mean, come to what? Now that we've come to this, the ofot lo kashu. Now that we've come to the conclusion that the birds are not a contradiction, right, from the Mishnah to the Braita, the ofot lo kashu hadadi. These are not a contradiction. Why? Because they're talking about different realities, talking about different types of birds. V'lo dachika la'ukma matnitin beplugta ditnai. Right, we don't have to say that our Mishnayot and our Braita are related to a machloket tanaim. Chaya chaya nami lo tukma kitanaim. So now don't say that regarding animals that it's subject to machloket tanaim either. Ela tavai kil Rabbanan. Both of them are like Rabbanan. Umatnitin bevival katan. V'chein aid Shabbat. And therefore now we say as follows. Our Mishnah is talking about a bevar katan. And also the Mishnah that we quoted from Shabbat that discusses Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim, that's also talking about a bevar katan. Uvraita diktani ein tzadin bevar gadol. And the Braita that's talking about that says ein tzadin, that's talking about a bevar gadol. V'yesh la lishamet, and that's where the animal can get away. Now, so then he says v'rashbag af bevar katan palig. Okay, now that we've established that our Mishnah is talking about a bevar katan, let's have a look at it again. Right, our Mishnah said just the part about tzadin chaya ve'of mina bivarin. You have a small enclosure, so you can take the animal or the bird from there because it's already considered trapped. And then we say Rashbag omer lo kol habivarin shavin. What's Rashbag coming to add? What's he coming to say? So Rashi understands now that even though we're talking about a bevar katan, nonetheless there might still be a bevar katan where the animal can get away. So that's what he says. Rashi says Rashbag af bevar katan palig. Even there, he argues, im tzarich lama have mitzuda inami im tzarich lama have mitzuda. In other words, even if it's a small enclosure, if a person still has to come along and say, "Come and bring me a trap to get hold of this animal," so there Rashbag would say, "No, that would be forbidden." So that is one. That's one way of now reading the Mishnah. Or then says Rashi, inami alternatively, lav lafluge ata, maybe. We'll see this discussion very, very shortly in the Gemara. Maybe Rashbag does not actually come to argue, lav lafluge ata, ela lefelushe gedol kaman, but he's coming to explain what the Tanakama says. Okay, that's where we leave it. At this point, it's unresolved in the Gemara. whether Rashbag is coming to argue with the Tanakama or whether he is coming to explain the Tanakama. But we have now resolved, that's how we've resolved the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Braita. It's not that one follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, one follows the opinion of Chachamim, or that there's a difference between them. It's rather that they're talking about different things, talking about how large the enclosure is, and that would be the determining factor as to whether the animal is considered trapped or not. So, the question you're all wondering, and that you're all thinking, is how large is large, right? Says the Gemara now, we're back inside. It says, Lo kashahav v'akatanam v'agadol. So, heichidami bevar katan, heichidami bevar gadol. Okay, what is considered a large enclosure? What is considered a small enclosure? You understand immediately that we can't give a size. We can't say, it's 4 amot by 4 amot, because it's going to depend on whatever the animal is. The larger the animal, the larger an enclosure and might still be considered trapped. The smaller the animal, vice versa. So the Gemara now gives 3 possibilities, 3 ways that we could measure, we could determine whether this is considered a bevar katan or whether it's a bevar gadol. So answer number 1, Amar of Ashi, Kol heicha daraita batre umatila bechad shichya. So Rav Ashi says the way to determine it is so long as you can run after the animal, right? You're running behind it or walking behind it. Umatila, and you reach it b'chad shichya, right? With one movement. B'chad shichya. You read in one movement, you're able to get it. You don't need to trap it. It means it's there. You're able to catch the animal. Says Rashi b'chad shichya b'pam achat. One time that you sort of crouch over letafso in order to try and catch it, and it can't get away, that is considered a bivar katan. That is answer number 1. That is Rav Ashi. Right, so Rav Ashi Amar Rav Ashi, Kol heicha deraita batra umatila b'chad shichya, as long as you can reach in one time, in one movement. Bivar katan, that's a bivar katan. Ve'idach bivar gadol, and anything that would take more than that, that's considered a bivar gadol, where you cannot come and trap. Okay, inami. Alternatively, answer number 2, kol heicha deika ukce bivar gadol, ve'idach bivar katan. Anywhere that has ukce, Rashi says zaviyot. So there's a lot of sort of corners and a lot of areas where the animal can go and hide and can evade you. That would be considered a bivar gadol. And anything that doesn't have that is considered a bivar katan. Notice the first definition defined a bivar katan, and by elimination we learned what a bivar gadol is. Here it's the other way around. Okay, so that's answer number 2. If it has a different pinot, different corners and different areas where the animal can go and get away. Inami, answer number 3, very interesting. Kol hecha de nafla tule de kotla de katle ahadade. Anywhere where the shade, right? Tule is shade. The shade from the walls falls onto each other, i.e., with the shade from the 2 sides of the walls meets. That is considered a bivar katan. Ve'idach bivar gadol. Anything else going to be a bivar gadol. So Rashi says, the nafle tula de katle ahadade meirov kotno v'katzor, because it's very small and because it's very short. That's where the shade is going to meet. Okay, so that's interesting. That makes us think of the Gemara in the beginning of Sukkah. It talks about the shade coming down from the walls. But what's interesting about that 3rd definition is that also that seems to be more of an objective definition in terms of how big the area is. Right, the first 2 are related to the animal itself and where it can get away. I guess really the first one is the most subjective definition in terms of what it's going to take for you to reach the animal. The second one talks about corners where the animal can hide. That's maybe a combination of subjective and objective. And the 3rd one seems to be the most objective definition. Okay, but be that as it may, the principle that emerges essentially is the more difficult that it is to reach the animal, the less likelihood it is that it's going to be considered trapped. So then we're now in the third last of the narrow lines. We saw that in the Mishnah, Rashbag said, "Lo kol habivarim shavim." They're not all the same. And he gave the klal kosh mechusat said that. So Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav Yosef says in the name of Rav Yehuda, says in the name of Shmuel, that yes, halacha follows Rashbag. Halacha follows Rashbag over here. So Amar le Abaye halacha miklal de pligi. If you're saying that the halacha follows him, so the implication is we're not going to say the halacha follows opinion A or follows opinion B when A and B are different, when there's a machloket between them. So you by telling us, by telling us that the halacha follows Rashbag, you're saying miklal de pligi. You're saying there's a machloket between Rashbag and Rabbanan, or between Rashbag and Tanakama. Rashi Aviyah says, halacha miklal de pligi, Rabbanan. You're implying that the Rabbanan argued against him. Lemeimar kol habivarin shavin b'tmiyah. Right? Why is this such a difficult question now? It's a much more difficult question having learned Gemara than just having seen the Mishnah. Because what did Rashbag say? Rashbag said, Lo kol habivarin shavin. When you say the term bivar is an enclosure, it depends how big it is, how small it is. What's our Gemara just done? Our Gemara has just gone through explaining. We said we had a contradiction between the Mishnah and between the Braita. Okay, we suggested a way to resolve it, and then we rejected that, and we suggested another way to resolve it. How did we resolve the contradiction between our Mishnah and our Braita? Because both, one said you can trap from the Bivarin, and one said you can't trap from the Bivarin. We essentially said, Lo kol habivarin shavin. That was in different words, but that was exactly the terutz of the Gemara. The Gemara said over there, you're talking about a small bivar, and over here, you're talking about a large one. Right? And then we gave a definition. We said, what is the difference between a small bivar and a large one? So that's everybody. So how can you, having said that, having explained the Mishnah, and the only way to resolve the contradiction between the Mishnah and the Gemara is by saying that, what? That lo kol habivarin shavin. How can you now come along and say, so halacha follows Rashbag who says lo kol habivarin shavin. Halacha follows him, not like Chachamim and not like Tanakama, but we just explained that Tanakama exactly says lo kol habivarin shavin. That's it's a good kasha. It's a good question. Right? How can you say that? So again, Rashi said halacha miklal de pligi Rabbanan alei halacha miklal de pligi Rabbanan alei. You are assuming, you are inferring that the Chachamim are arguing against him, are arguing against the fact that he says kol habivarin shavin. So Rashi says, but tmiyah. This is very, very strange. V'ha'ukimna bevivar katan mishum denitzot v'omed. We've just established that if it's a bevivar katan, then it's considered a trap, and if it's a bevivar gadol, then it's not. So that is the challenge of Abaye. Amar le Abaye halacha miklal de pligi. So amar le umay nafkalach mina. So he says to him, what's the nafkamina? What do you mean, what's the nafkamina? Again, so Rashi says here, my nafkalach mina. Says, what difference does it make? If I said that's the halacha, kol sheken d'ilo pligi hilchadai. Right? If I say halacha is like Rashbag, so it's even better if there's no machloket. So then you know the halacha is like Rashbag. Everybody's going to agree. Even better if there's no machloket. But that's not, generally speaking, that's not the way that the Gemara would phrase it. Generally speaking, if the Gemara is going to phrase, says halacha is like this, it means halacha is like Rabbi Shimon and not like Rabbi Yehuda or whatever. Okay, but it's but he says, okay, he says, what difference does it make? You challenging me on the fact that I said halacha, so it means that they have a machloket. Even if they don't have a machloket, that's the halacha. So he says, Amar le Gemara Gmol Zmol Tatehei. Amar le Gemara Gmol Zmol Tatehei. So Gemara Gmol means go and learn your Gemara. Zmolta is like a zemer. It's like a song. Meaning, are you learning, or are you just singing? Are you just saying words that have no meaning? Says Rashi over here. He says mashal shotimu. It's using a sort of an analogy, but to express the opinion. To say kmo zavun v'zavin tagla akli. It's another sort of expression that we use. כך גמרא גמור אומר לתלמיד שוטה, לימוד הן אמת הן שיבוש, ואין לך לזמר ושיר. In other words, it doesn't really matter what you're saying, or you're not sure what you're talking about. Are you learning? Are you singing a song? Meaning, what do you mean, my nafkala ramina? Meaning, it makes a difference. Go back and learn. Or it's as if saying you're learning the way that you would essentially sing a song. In other words, it doesn't make Doesn't make sense what you're saying. Okay, but the Gemara it remains unresolved. So at the end of the day, are we saying this is the machloket between them? They're arguing between them. If you can say halacha Rashbag, what's behind that is, do we say that Rashbag is explaining or is arguing with the Tanna Kama, and that remains unresolved. The Gemara doesn't really say. We saw it earlier in Rashi, though. Rashi does give an understanding, and if we say that Rashbag is just explaining the Tanna Kama, okay, and he's saying lo kol habivarin shavin, so that's fine. That's fine. We understand that. We understand that very well. If we say that Rashbag is coming to argue with the Tanna Kama, how does that work? Because we just said lo kol habivarin shavin. So that's what Rashi said earlier. He said once we establish that our Mishnah is talking about a bivar katan, when Rashbag comes along and says lo kol habivarin shavin, meaning we know lo kol habivarin shavin. We know that there's a difference between a bivar gadol and a bivar katan. That in a bivar gadol you cannot go and further trap the animal, but in a bivar katan you can. So Rashbag is saying, no, I'm refining it even further in the concept of a bevar katan. You should know that it's not automatic that you can go and trap the animal. It still depends how katan, and even there we would say lo kol habivarin shavin. That is the that would be the difference. That's what Rashi said. Right, Rashi in Dibur Matchil hashta datit la'achi. Right at the end of that Dibur Matchil, about halfway through the page, right? He says Rashbag. Rashi says Rashbag afu bevar katan palig. Rashbag he disagrees. Even if bevar katan, im tzarech lomar avei metzuda. Right? If you need to say come along and bring a trap, where does Rashi get that from? That sentence that's from the continuation of the Gemara, which we'll see next week. But he says inami alternatively he says lav lafluke ata el lefrusha gedil kaman. So maybe it's not. Maybe it's not to argue, but it's actually to explain, and then there would be no machloket between them. Okay, we're going to get into the next thing. The Gemara talks about kol mechusat seidah. That's really going further into the definitions of what is considered mechusat seidah. But we will leave that for next week. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Regards. Cultures.